I've spent 60 years on this earth, and I learned something important along the way. People will only respect you if you demand it. I forgot that lesson for too long. I let myself become invisible, the woman who cleaned up after everyone, who made the meals, who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table after my husband died. I raised 3 children alone, and I thought that sacrifice meant something. I thought they would remember. They didn't. Sunday lunch at Greg and Cecilia's house started like every other visit I'd made in the past 5 years, with that familiar knot of dread in my stomach. Their mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured lawn in the most expensive neighborhood in the county, all marble counters and vaulted ceilings, imported tile and crystal chandeliers that cost more than I made in a year. The kind of place that made you wipe your feet 3 times before entering, made you afraid to touch anything for fear it might break and cost you a month's rent. My daughter married well, everyone said. Greg Randall, self-made millionaire, started with nothing and built an empire in commercial real estate. Good for him, good for her. They said it like a blessing, like Cecilia had won some kind of lottery. And maybe she had, at least on paper. Except Greg forgot where he came from. Or maybe he remembered too well, and that's why he treated me like garbage. Because I reminded him of the poverty he'd escaped, the struggle he'd left behind. I was a living ghost of his past, and he hated me for it. I sat at their dining table, surrounded by gleaming china rimmed with gold, crystal glasses that caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across the white tablecloth. Cecilia fluttered around nervously, always nervous these days, her movements quick and uncertain, like a bird that sensed a storm coming. She'd lost weight since the wedding, her collarbones too prominent, her smile too tight. My other children couldn't make it today. Convenient excuses about work and kids and prior commitments. They'd learned to avoid these lunches. I should have too. But I kept coming, kept hoping that maybe this time would be different, that maybe Greg would show some basic human decency, that maybe Cecilia would remember she had a mother who loved her. So it was just the 3 of us, and the tension thick enough to choke on. Greg lounged in his chair at the head of the table like a king on a throne, already 3 whiskeys deep before the appetizers even arrived. His face had that ruddy flush of a man who drinks too much and exercises too little, despite the expensive gym membership he bragged about constantly. His eyes, cold and calculating behind his designer glasses, watched me with barely concealed contempt. Every time I lifted my fork, every time I spoke, I could feel his judgment like a physical weight. "More whiskey," he said, not asked. Said. Like I was the help. Like I was the maid they'd hired to serve dinner and clean up after. I was cutting my chicken, taking my time, focusing on the movement of the knife through the tender meat. The china plate made a soft scraping sound. I didn't look up. "The bottle's right there, Greg. You can reach it." His jaw tightened. I saw it from the corner of my eye, that muscle jumping just below his ear. Cecilia's fork clattered against her plate, too loud in the sudden silence. She knew what was coming. We both did. I said, "Pour me more whiskey." His voice dropped lower, dangerous, the way dogs growl before they bite. "Are you deaf, old woman?" Old woman, not Marla, not even Mrs. Donovan. Just old woman, like that's all I was, all I'd ever be, something decrepit and useless, taking up space in his perfect house. I set down my knife and fork carefully, precisely, folded my hands in my lap, looked him straight in the eye. His pupils were dilated from the alcohol, but behind them I could see the calculation, the anger, the absolute certainty that he was in control here. "I'm your mother-in-law, not your servant. Pour it yourself." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes, that electric charge in the air when you know something terrible is about to happen. I saw it in his face, the rage, the disbelief that I dared contradict him, that I dared assert myself in his house. In his world, everyone jumped when he spoke. Money had made him powerful, and power had made him cruel. He'd forgotten what it was like to be told no. Maybe no one had told him no in years. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh screech that made Cecilia flinch. 3 strides around the table, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't look away. Just watched him come, my heart pounding, but my hand steady in my lap. He loomed over me, 6 feet tall and still wearing his work clothes. Expensive suit, silk tie, shoes that probably cost more than my car payment. This close, I could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the broken capillaries in his nose, the way his hands trembled slightly with rage. "Servants must obey," he said, and threw his glass of whiskey in my face. The liquid burned my eyes immediately, made them water and sting. It dripped down my nose and chin, soaked into my good blouse, the navy blue one I'd worn to look presentable in his house, the one I'd ironed that morning and checked 3 times for stains. Ice cubes hit my chest with sharp, cold impacts and clattered to the floor at my feet, skittering across the expensive hardwood. The crystal glass followed, still half full, and shattered when it hit the floor. Shards of glass exploded outward, glittering in the afternoon light like diamonds. Cecilia gasped, pressed both hands to her mouth, but she didn't move, didn't stand up, didn't defend me, just sat there, frozen in her chair, her eyes wide and shocked but her body immobile. Like she'd been trained not to react, trained to accept whatever Greg did as normal, as acceptable, as just the way things were. I stood up slowly, deliberately, whiskey dripping from my hair onto my shoulders. The liquid had soaked through my blouse to my skin, cold and sticky. I could feel it running down my back, pooling at my waistband. My shoes crunched on broken glass. Looked at Greg, really looked at him. Saw the smug satisfaction on his face, the certainty that he'd won, that he'd put me in my place, reminded me of where I stood in his hierarchy. "You're going to regret that," I said quietly, each word precise and clear. He laughed, actually laughed, throwing his head back like I'd told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "What are you going to do? Sue me? I have lawyers who would eat you alive, tie you up in court for years until you're bankrupt. Get out of my house, now." I picked up my purse from where I'd set it by my chair, moved around the broken glass carefully. Cecilia called after me, her voice high and strained, but I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't give either of them the satisfaction of seeing tears in my eyes, even though they were there, mixing with the whiskey, burning like acid. In my car, I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, shaking, not from fear, from fury, from the cold, crystalline clarity of a decision made. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I stared at their mansion through the windshield, at the perfect lawn, the perfect facade, the perfect lie of their perfect life. Greg thought he was untouchable. He thought his money and his arrogance made him invincible, put him above consequences, above accountability, above basic human decency. He was wrong. I drove home slowly, carefully, even though my hands trembled on the wheel, and my vision blurred occasionally from the tears I finally allowed myself. My small apartment felt like a sanctuary after the oppressive grandeur of their mansion, cramped but mine, modest but honest, a place where I didn't have to pretend or perform or accept abuse. I showered for 30 minutes, scrubbing the whiskey from my skin and hair, watching the water run amber at first, then clear. Changed into comfortable clothes, soft sweatpants, an old t-shirt, thick socks. Made myself a cup of tea with shaking hands. Then I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen, and I started planning. The notebook was one I'd bought years ago, but never used, the pages still crisp and white. I dated the first page carefully, October 15th, the day everything changed. Greg Randall had made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated me, seen me as weak, as beaten down by life, as someone too tired and too old to fight back. He saw an old woman, invisible and harmless. He forgot that strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with muscles and money and shouting. Sometimes, The most dangerous people are the ones you overlook. I made a list, my handwriting neat and methodical, despite the rage still burning in my chest. Greg's routines, his habits, his fears. Because everyone has fears, even arrogant millionaires. I knew he slept poorly, always had. Cecilia mentioned it once during one of our rare, honest conversations. I knew he prided himself on control, on being the smartest man in the room, on never showing weakness. I knew his ego was fragile beneath the bluster, that his self-made success story was built on a foundation of insecurity. And I knew exactly how to break him. Not through force, not with lawsuits or confrontation, but with something far more devastating. I would get inside his head, make him question reality, make him feel powerless and watched and afraid, give him back every emotion he'd inflicted on others for years. I would destroy him from the inside out, and he'd never see it coming. Before we continue, we ask you to subscribe and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. Monday morning dawned grey and cold, the kind of October day that promised an early winter. I woke up at 6, made coffee, sat by my kitchen window watching the sunrise, paint the clouds orange and pink. My body ached. I'd slept poorly, my mind racing through plans and possibilities all night, but my resolve was iron hard, unshakable. At 7:30, I called Diana Myers. She lived next door, had for 20 years. Diana was one of those eternal artists, the kind who saw beauty and possibility in everything, who could turn trash into treasure and make magic out of mundane materials. Her house looked like controlled chaos from the outside. Wind chimes hanging from every eave, sculptures made from found objects dotting her garden, her front yard a riot of colours and textures that the Homeowners Association had long since given up trying to regulate. "Marla," she answered on the second ring, sounding delighted. Diana was always delighted about something, a new painting technique she'd discovered, an interesting piece of driftwood she'd found, a recipe she wanted to try. "I haven't heard from you in days. How was the lunch at Cecilia's? Can I come over? I need to talk." My voice was steady, but Diana knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying. "Give me 15 minutes to make myself presentable." 15 minutes later, I stood in Diana's cluttered living room, surrounded by her art. Paintings stacked in corners waiting to be framed. Sculptures made from twisted metal and beach glass. Shelves overflowing with books on everything from Italian Renaissance art to quantum physics. The walls were painted a warm terracotta, covered with photographs and sketches, and pieces of fabric she'd collected from travels around the world. I sat on her ancient couch, reupholstered 3 times in different fabrics, each layer showing through rips and tears like geological strata, and accepted the tea she pressed into my hands. The mug was handmade, slightly lopsided, glazed in swirling blues and greens. Steam rose from the surface, carrying the scent of chamomile and honey. I told her everything. Started from the beginning, from years of small slights and casual cruelties, building to the whiskey in my face, Greg's words, Cecilia's frozen silence. Diana listened without interrupting, her artist's eyes studying my face with the same intensity she'd study a painting, seeing things beneath the surface that most people missed. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, set her own mug down on the coffee table with a soft clink. "What do you need?" she asked. Not "what are you going to do?" Not "you should let it go." Just, "what do you need?" "You know that mannequin you use for Halloween? The really realistic one?" Diana's eyes lit up with immediate understanding. A slow smile spread across her face, the kind of smile that meant she was already 10 steps ahead, already seeing the possibilities. "Oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be very good." We spent the rest of the morning in her garage, going through her Halloween decorations. Diana went all out every year. Her yard became a legendary nightmare landscape of tombstones and skeletons, ghosts hanging from trees, Mannequins posed in disturbing tableaus that made children dare each other to walk past her house. She had bins and bins of decorations accumulated over decades, organized in a system that only she understood. The mannequin she showed me was perfect, better than I'd hoped. Life-sized, made from rigid foam covered in realistic latex skin that had been painted and weathered to look disturbingly lifelike. Its eyes were glass, painted with unsettling precision, blue irises with tiny flecks of gold, pupils that seemed to follow you as you moved. Its hair was real human hair, brown and slightly disheveled. It wore simple clothes, jeans, a white t-shirt that made it look like an ordinary person frozen in time. In the dim garage light, it looked almost alive, like it might start breathing at any moment. "I call him Harold," Diana said, patting its shoulder affectionately like it was an old friend. "He's been my favorite for years, freaked out more trick-or-treaters than anything else I've ever made. But for you, Marla, for this, he's yours. I'll return him when I'm done. Take your time. Take as long as you need. This is important work." She helped me load Harold into my car trunk, his limbs folded awkwardly to fit, his glass eyes staring up at the garage ceiling. "Be careful, honey. Greg sounds dangerous." "He is. That's exactly why I'm not confronting him directly. I'm going to get inside his head instead, make him afraid of shadows." Diana hugged me at her front door, held on longer than usual. "If you need anything else, you call me. Anything at all. I mean it." I drove home with a mannequin in my trunk and a plan crystallizing in my mind like frost forming on glass, clear, precise, beautiful in its simplicity. Step 1 was straightforward enough. Get inside Greg's house without being noticed. I needed to understand his space, his sanctuary, the place where he felt most secure and in control. I knew Greg's schedule because Cecilia had complained about it often enough during better times, back when she still confided in me. He left for work at 7:30 every morning, like clockwork, never varied by more than 2 minutes. Cecilia went to her yoga class at 9, came back around 11. That gave me a window of nearly 2 hours, more than enough time. Tuesday morning, I parked down the street from their mansion, 3 houses away in a spot where their security cameras wouldn't see my car. I dressed carefully. Dark jeans, a black hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, cheap reading glasses I didn't actually need. If anyone saw me, I'd look like a generic jogger or delivery person. Forgettable. Invisible. I watched Greg's silver BMW pull out of the driveway at 7:28. Watched Cecilia's white Mercedes follow at 8:55, right on schedule. Waited another 5 minutes to be safe. Then I walked up their driveway like I belonged there, like I visited every day. I had a key. Cecilia gave it to me 3 years ago, pressed it into my hand one afternoon, and said it was for emergencies, in case she ever needed me to check on the house while they traveled. I'd never used it before, but this qualified as an emergency, just not the kind Cecilia had imagined. The house was silent when I let myself in through the side door, the one that led directly into the laundry room. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, feel it in my throat, taste copper on my tongue. But my hand stayed steady as I keyed in the alarm code, Cecilia's birthday, because Greg was predictable in his sentimentality. The beeping stopped. The house settled into silence again. I stood perfectly still for a full minute, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of an expensive clock somewhere, the whisper of the heating system. I'd dressed in dark clothes and gloves, brought a small backpack with tools I might need. If anyone saw me now, I'd look like a burglar. Better to be arrested as an intruder than recognized as Marla Donovan. Their bedroom was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a long hallway, lined with expensive art they'd bought at galleries and auctions. Abstract pieces that cost tens of thousands of dollars, that Greg liked to brag about at dinner parties. I'd heard him once, explaining to guests that art was an investment, that he bought based on projected value appreciation, not because he actually liked any of it. The bedroom door stood open. I stepped inside, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The room was enormous, bigger than my entire apartment, with a massive king-sized bed, silk sheets in dove grey, blackout curtains still drawn against the morning light. Everything was immaculate, styled like a hotel suite, impersonal, cold. Greg slept on the right side. I could tell by the reading glasses on the nightstand, the phone charger plugged in and waiting, the thriller novel left open face down, the water glass half empty. His side of the bed was unmade, sheets twisted, pillow still holding the impression of his head. Cecilia's side was pristine, made with hospital corners. I walked around to his side of the bed slowly, studying the angles, the lighting, imagining what he'd see when he opened his eyes in the morning. The nightstand, the window, the closet door slightly ajar. Then I went back downstairs, retrieved Harold from where I'd hidden him in the bushes outside, and carried him up to the bedroom. He was lighter than he looked, easy to maneuver once you understood how his joints worked. I positioned him at the foot of the bed, on Greg's side, angled so he'd be the first thing Greg saw when he opened his eyes. Harold's glass eyes stared at nothing, empty and wrong. In the morning light filtering through the curtains, he looked like a corpse standing upright, rigor mortis frozen in an eternal stance. I adjusted his arms, making one hand reach slightly forward, fingers extended like he was pointing, or accusing. Perfect. I took a step back, examining my work with a critical eye. Yes, this would work. This would plant the first seed of fear, make Greg question what he'd seen, wonder if his eyes had deceived him in that first confused moment of waking. I let myself out the way I came, locked the door, reset the alarm, drove home. Took a long shower, even though I hadn't broken a sweat. Made lunch mechanically, my mind already racing ahead to the next steps. Waited. The call came at 6:30 the next morning, waking me from a restless sleep. "Mom?" Cecilia's voice was strained, high-pitched. Did you go to our house yesterday?" I sat up in bed, reached for my robe, kept my voice sleepy, confused. "No, honey. Why? What's wrong?" "Greg found something. A mannequin. In our bedroom, standing right by his side of the bed. He woke up and saw it first thing. Started screaming. I've never heard him scream like that before, Mom." "Never." "A mannequin? That's very strange. Are you sure?" "I saw it too. It was terrifying, this lifelike figure just standing there. Like it had been watching us sleep all night. Greg's losing his mind. Thinks someone broke in. Thinks someone's trying to scare him. Did he call the police?" There was a pause. "No, he doesn't want to look scared. Doesn't want to admit that something like this got to him. You know how he is about appearing weak. But, Mum, he's really shaken up. I've never seen him like this. He checked every room in the house, every closet, under the beds. He's convinced someone was inside. Well, you should definitely check your security system. Make sure all your doors and windows are locked. Maybe consider having the alarm company come do an inspection." Yeah, Greg already called them. They're coming this afternoon." She sounded tired, wrung out. "I'm sorry, I needed to call someone. Needed to talk about this." "It's okay, honey. That's what I'm here for." After I hung up, I lay back in bed and allowed myself a small smile. First strike successful. Harold had done his job perfectly. Now Greg was questioning his security, his safety, the sanctity of his own bedroom. And this was just the beginning. I spent the rest of that day doing ordinary things, maintaining my normal routine. Went to the library for my shift. I worked part-time reshelving books, helping patrons find what they needed, enjoying the quiet sanctuary of words and paper. Had lunch at the small cafe across the street, treating myself to a sandwich and coffee. Stopped at the grocery store on the way home, buying vegetables and chicken for dinner. But my mind was never still, never at rest. Always working, always planning the next move. Like playing chess, thinking 3 moves ahead, anticipating Greg's reactions, and planning accordingly. That evening, Diana came over. I made us pasta with marinara sauce, opened a bottle of red wine I'd been saving. We sat at my small kitchen table, and I told her about Greg's reaction, about the scream Cecilia had described. Diana laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine, had to set the glass down and wipe tears from her eyes. "I wish I could have seen his face," she said, still chuckling. "I wish I could have been there for that exact moment when he opened his eyes. The look of pure terror." It was effective, but now I need to let him stew for a few days. Let his imagination do the work for me. The mind is a powerful thing. It'll conjure worse scenarios than I ever could. "You're terrifying, Marla. Genuinely terrifying. I love it." Over the next few days, I stayed deliberately visible, deliberately normal. Maintained my routine, made myself seen, worked my shifts at the library, had lunch with my friend Barbara from church, called my other children, had pleasant conversations about nothing important, called Cecilia twice, casual conversations where I asked about her day, listened to her talk about the security company's inspection, about Greg's increasing paranoia. "He's checking the cameras constantly," she told me during the second call. "Reviewing footage, looking for anything unusual. He's convinced someone broke in, even though the security company said there's no evidence. All the cameras show is normal activity, us coming and going, the mailman, nothing suspicious. Maybe it was just a prank, some neighborhood kids." That's what I suggested. He got angry, said I wasn't taking it seriously. "But Mom, what else could it be? The cameras don't lie." "No," I agreed. "They don't. But cameras only see what's in their field of view. And I'd studied those cameras carefully, knew exactly where they pointed, knew the blind spots. Greg's expensive security system had given him a false sense of safety." Thursday night, I went back to their house, bolder this time, more confident. The fear of being caught had faded, replaced by a cold focus. I knew Greg went to his office in the basement around 9 every evening, spent an hour there going through paperwork, making calls to investors on the East Coast where it was still business hours. Cecilia usually went upstairs to read or watch television. They existed in the same house, but separate orbits, rarely intersecting except at meals. I let myself in at 9:15, using the same side door, moving through the laundry room into the kitchen. Stood perfectly still for a moment, listening. I could hear Greg's voice faintly from the basement, talking on the phone, his words indistinct, but his tone clear. Aggressive, demanding, the voice of a man used to giving orders. I moved quickly but carefully through the house, taking small things, personal things, items that had meaning, that Greg would notice missing. His favorite pen from his desk in the study, a Mont Blanc he'd received as a gift, that he used to sign all his important contracts. I'd heard him brag about it once, about how the weight of it made him feel powerful. I slipped it into my pocket. The bookmark from the thriller novel he was reading, a leather strip with his initials embossed in gold. I tucked it into my other pocket. One sock from his drawer, chosen carefully from the middle of a matched pair. Not the top sock where it would be obvious, but from deep in the drawer where he'd have to search. The bottle of expensive cologne from his bathroom counter, something French and pretentious that cost $200 an ounce. I held it carefully, not wanting to drop it and create noise. Then I moved these items, redistributed them through the house in wrong places. The pen went into the kitchen junk drawer, buried under takeout menus and twist ties and broken rubber bands. The bookmark went under the living room couch, far enough back that he'd need to search for it. The sock went into the guest bathroom, tucked behind the spare toilet paper. The cologne went into Cecilia's closet, placed carefully on a high shelf behind her shoeboxes. Small things. Things he'd notice missing eventually. Things that would turn up in impossible places, making him question his own memory, his own sanity. Had he put them there and forgotten? Was he losing his mind? Was someone moving them deliberately? On my way out, I adjusted 3 picture frames in the hallway, tilting them just slightly off-center. Not enough to be obvious at first glance, but enough that Greg, who was meticulous about such things, would eventually notice. Moved his car keys from the hook by the door to the coffee table. These were the kind of changes that would make him doubt himself. Small, subtle, maddening. I was home by 10, my heart still racing with adrenaline. I made myself chamomile tea, sat in my living room with the lights off, looking out at the quiet street. Allowed myself to feel satisfaction, cold and pure. Greg had no idea what was happening to him. He thought he was being stalked by some external threat, some enemy who wanted revenge. He was looking outward, searching for danger in the wrong places. He didn't understand yet that the real enemy was already inside his walls. The phone calls from Cecilia became more frequent over the following week, her voice increasingly strained each time. I could hear the toll this was taking on her, the way Greg's paranoia was bleeding into every aspect of their lives. He swears he left his keys on the hook, but they were on the coffee table, she told me on Monday. And his pen is missing. He tore his office apart looking for it. Accused the cleaning lady of stealing it until I reminded him we gave her the week off. Maybe he just misplaced it. That happens, especially when you're stressed. That's what I said. He got so angry, Mum. Started yelling about how I was gaslighting him, how everyone was against him. And it's not just the pen. His cologne is gone. His bookmark, one of his socks. These random things keep disappearing. What do the cameras show? Nothing. That's what's making him crazy. The security company says there's no evidence of anyone breaking in. All the doors and windows show secure. But Greg knows something's wrong. He says he can feel it. I made sympathetic noises, offered comfort and support, asked if there was anything I could do to help. Cecilia said no, they just needed to figure this out, needed Greg to calm down and think rationally. But Greg wasn't thinking rationally anymore. I could tell from the stories Cecilia shared, the incidents she described. He was unraveling, slowly but surely, and I was pulling the threads with surgical precision. The following Tuesday, I escalated again. I'd been planning this move carefully, waiting for the right moment, and now the stage was set. I let myself into their house at 1 in the afternoon. Both Greg and Cecilia were out. I'd confirmed their schedules, knew I had at least 2 hours. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching nothing unnecessarily, leaving no trace. This time, I left messages. Small notes in places only Greg would find, written in block letters on plain white paper, using gloves to avoid fingerprints. Inside his briefcase, tucked into the pocket where he kept business cards, I'm watching. In his wallet, folded between his credit cards, you're not safe. On his bathroom mirror, written in the condensation after I'd run hot water in the shower. Remember. Remember what? I didn't explain. Let him fill in the blanks. Let his guilty conscience supply the meaning. Because men like Greg always had things to feel guilty about. Always had secrets, betrayals, actions they preferred to keep buried. I'd been doing research on Greg over the past week, making quiet inquiries, talking to people who'd known him on his way up. His path to success hadn't been clean. He'd stepped on people deliberately, betrayed partners when it suited him, broken promises without hesitation. That's how men like him got rich. They took what they wanted and convinced themselves they deserved it, that the ends justified the means. One woman I spoke to, a former business partner Greg had forced out of a lucrative deal, told me she'd spent years angry about what he'd done to her. He's a snake, she'd said. Charming when he needs something from you, cruel the moment you're no longer useful. I hope someone takes him down someday. Now, someone was. Not with lawsuits or exposure, with something more insidious, with fear. After I left the messages, I took one more step. I moved items in his closet, rearranging his shirts so they were no longer organized by color. Greg was obsessive about his clothes. Cecilia had mentioned it once. Everything had its place, its order. The disruption would gnaw at him, make him feel like his control was slipping. I left through the side door at 2:45, plenty of time before Cecilia returned from her errands. Drove home carefully, obeying every traffic law, my heart steady and calm. That evening, my phone rang at 8 o'clock. Cecilia, crying. "Mum, can I come over?" "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" She arrived 20 minutes later, eyes red and swollen, mascara streaked down her cheeks. I made her tea, sat her on my couch, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders even though the apartment wasn't cold, waited for her to find her words. "Greg found notes," she finally said. "Threatening notes. In his things, where only he would find them. Mom, someone's definitely targeting him. This isn't random. Someone's been in our house multiple times, moving things, leaving messages." "What did the notes say?" she told me, her voice shaking. "I'm watching. You're not safe. Remember." "Did he call the police this time?" "No. He says they'd think he's crazy, that there's no proof. The cameras still show nothing. It's like whoever's doing this is invisible." She looked up at me, desperate. "What if it's someone dangerous? What if they hurt him, hurt us?" I took her hand, squeezed gently. "Honey, has Greg ever thought about whether he might have done something to make someone this angry? Whether this might be about something in his past?" She pulled her hand away, defensive. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that people don't do things like this randomly. There's usually a reason, a motivation. Maybe Greg should think about whether he's hurt someone badly enough that they'd want revenge. Greg's not perfect, but he wouldn't... Wouldn't what? Treat people cruelly, throw drinks in their faces, call them servants?" My voice was harder than I'd intended. I softened it. "I'm sorry. I just think maybe there's more to this than a random stalker." Cecilia stayed for another hour, but the conversation had shifted. She'd become quieter, more withdrawn. When she left, I watched her drive away and wondered if the seed I'd planted would take root. Greg's paranoia was spreading beyond the house now. I heard through mutual acquaintances, the small-town social network that I'd carefully maintained over the years, that he'd become difficult at work, snapping at employees, accusing people of talking about him behind his back, missing meetings because he was convinced someone was following him. His business was starting to suffer. Good, but I wasn't done. The notes had been effective, but I needed something more. Something that would cut deeper, reach past his paranoia to the vulnerable core beneath. I spent 2 days planning my next move, researching, preparing. And then, when I was ready, I struck again. Greg's father had died when Greg was 12 years old. A car accident on a rainy highway, sudden and traumatic. Cecilia had told me about it years ago, during one of our early conversations, when she was still trying to make me understand Greg, to excuse his behavior by explaining his past pain. She'd said it shaped him, made him determined to succeed, to never be vulnerable like his father had been, never be taken by surprise by life. I found the newspaper article online, in the archives of the local paper from 30 years ago. A brief write-up, detailing the accident. Gregory Randall Sr. survived by his wife and son. Services to be held at the Methodist Church. In lieu of flowers, donations to the community fund. I printed it out on aged paper I'd bought specifically for this purpose, tea-stained and crumpled slightly, to make it look like it had been kept in a drawer for decades. Made it look like someone had been holding on to this information, cherishing it, waiting for the right moment to use it. Then I went to Greg's office building. It was a sleek glass tower downtown, all modern architecture and expensive artwork in the lobby. I'd never been inside before, but I walked in like I belonged there, carrying a folder and wearing business casual clothes. The security guard barely glanced at me, just another middle-aged woman with paperwork, invisible and forgettable. I took the elevator to the parking garage, found Greg's BMW in its reserved spot. The garage was empty at 7 in the evening, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting harsh shadows. I placed the article under his windshield wiper, folded carefully, impossible to miss. Then I left the way I'd come, nodding politely at the security guard on my way out. The call came the next morning at 6 a.m. "Mum." Cecilia's voice was thick with tears. "Something terrible happened last night." "What? Are you okay?" "Greg found something. An article about his father's passing. Someone left it on his car." "Mum," he completely broke down. I've never seen him cry before, not once in all the years we've been together. He sobbed for an hour, kept saying that someone was trying to ruin him, that someone knew everything about him, his past, his vulnerabilities. I let silence stretch for a moment. That's horrific. Who would do something like that?" "I don't know, but Mum, after he calmed down, something changed. He started talking. Really talking for the first time maybe ever. About his childhood, about watching his father die, about feeling helpless. He said he built his whole life around never feeling that way again, around always being in control, always being powerful enough that nothing could hurt him. That makes sense. But don't you see? It means he's scared, Mom. All this time, all his arrogance and cruelty, it was just him being terrified. And now someone's broken through his armor, and he doesn't know what to do." I chose my next words carefully. Fear makes people do cruel things sometimes. It doesn't excuse them, but it explains them. The question is what he does now, whether he uses this moment to change, or whether he just becomes more defensive. I think I'm starting to see him differently, starting to understand that maybe he's not as strong as I thought. Maybe he's just been scared this whole time, and taking it out on everyone around him. That's very perceptive, honey. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my morning coffee and thought about what Cecilia had said. She was starting to see Greg clearly, starting to understand that strength and cruelty weren't the same thing, that his behavior couldn't be excused by his pain. Good. That was progress. But it wasn't enough yet. I needed her to see not just that he was afraid, but that he was fundamentally broken. That his fear had made him into someone who hurt others without remorse. Over the next week, I continued my campaign, but pulled back slightly on direct actions. Let Greg's paranoia do the heavy lifting. Let his mind run wild with possibilities. Let him see threats where none existed. Let him isolate himself with his fear. Diana checked in regularly, bringing me food and company, helping me maintain my own equilibrium while I orchestrated Greg's destruction. We'd become co-conspirators, and I valued her support more than I could express. "How are you holding up?" she asked one evening over takeout Chinese food. "I'm fine, focused." "That's what worries me. You've been so calm through all of this, so methodical. Are you processing your own feelings about what happened?" "I processed them," I said. The moment he threw that whiskey in my face, I processed everything. The years of disrespect, the contempt, the way he made me feel less than human. I'm not doing this out of uncontrolled rage. I'm doing this because he needs to face consequences. And Cecilia? She's waking up, slowly, but she's seeing him for what he is. I saw Greg once during this time, at a distance. I was leaving the grocery store, pushing my cart toward my car, when I spotted him across the parking lot. He looked terrible, haggard, unkempt, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. He was standing by his BMW, looking around nervously, checking under the car before he got in. He didn't see me. I was just another old woman with groceries, beneath his notice even in his paranoid state. I loaded my groceries into my car and drove away, thinking about how far he'd fallen in just 3 weeks. From arrogant millionaire to paranoid wreck. From feeling invincible to jumping at shadows. And I'd barely touched him. I'd just made him aware of his own vulnerability, reminded him that control was an illusion. But now, it was time for the final phase. Time to stop working in shadows and bring everything into the light. Time to make sure he couldn't rebuild his defenses, couldn't convince himself he was just paranoid. Time to destroy him completely and make sure everyone saw it happen. Cecilia showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks into my campaign against Greg. I heard the knock and opened the door to find her standing there with a small suitcase, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, her jaw set with determination I hadn't seen in years. "Can I stay here for a few days?" she asked. "Of course, always." I pulled her inside, took her suitcase, led her to my small guest room, really just a room with a futon and some boxes I'd been meaning to sort through. "What happened?" She sat on the futon, picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Greg accused me of being part of it, said I was probably helping whoever's stalking him, said I'd turned against him just like everyone else." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I packed a bag and left. He didn't try to stop me." I sat beside her, put my arm around her shoulders. "I'm so sorry, honey." "Don't be. You were right, Mum. About everything. I've been making excuses for him for years, pretending his cruelty was just stress or pressure. But it's who he is. It's always been who he is. I just didn't want to see it." Over the next few days, Cecilia stayed with me, and I watched her slowly come back to herself. The woman she'd been before Greg, before she'd dimmed her own light to avoid outshining him. She started laughing again, real laughter. Started expressing opinions without second-guessing herself. Started making plans for her future that didn't involve waiting for Greg's approval. "I'm going to divorce him," she told me one morning over breakfast. "I've already talked to a lawyer. Greg's behavior is well documented now. The paranoia, the accusations, the way he's been treating people at work. My lawyer says I have a strong case." "I'm proud of you. I should have done this years ago. Should have seen what you saw. He treated you horribly, and I just sat there. I'm sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry I didn't defend you." "You're defending yourself now. That's what matters." But while Cecilia was finding her strength, Greg was losing his completely. I heard through the social network, that web of acquaintances and gossip that connected everyone in town, that he'd been asked to take a leave of absence from work, that his business partners were concerned about his erratic behavior, that he'd been seen arguing with himself in parking lots, talking to people who weren't there. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, like I'd hollowed out this man and found nothing substantial inside, just rage and fear and a desperate need for control. But I pushed that feeling aside. This was what justice looked like, not clean or satisfying, but necessary. Diana came by one evening while Cecilia was out meeting with her lawyer. We sat on my small balcony with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. "You've almost won," Diana said. "Greg's falling apart. Cecilia's free. You could stop now." "I know. But you're not going to, are you?" I took a sip of wine, considered. "Not yet. He needs to understand fully, needs to face everything he's done. A public reckoning, not just a private collapse." "Be careful, Marla. Don't lose yourself in this." "I won't. I know exactly who I am and what I'm doing." The next day, I called Cecilia's siblings and a few close family friends. Told them I was worried about Greg, about his deteriorating mental state, and suggested we have a family gathering to discuss how to help him. Everyone agreed to come. They'd all heard stories about Greg's paranoia, his accusations, his unraveling. What they didn't know was that this wasn't about helping Greg. It was about exposing him. I spent 3 days preparing, gathering evidence, organizing my thoughts. I reviewed everything I knew about Greg's cruelty, not just to me, but to others. Contacted people he'd hurt in business, in his personal life, collected stories and testimonies. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about truth, about making sure Greg couldn't rebuild his facade, couldn't convince everyone that he was just a victim of circumstances, that none of this was his fault. Cecilia helped, without knowing she was helping. She told me stories about their marriage, about his controlling behavior, about how he'd isolated her from friends and family, made her doubt her own worth. She showed me text messages where he'd been cruel, dismissive, manipulative. "I used to think this was normal," she said, scrolling through her phone. "That all marriages had this dynamic, but they don't, do they?" "No, honey, they don't." I set the gathering for the following Saturday at my apartment. Neutral ground, my territory. Told Cecilia to invite Greg, to tell him that the family wanted to talk, wanted to help him through his crisis. She hesitated. "He'll think it's a trap." It is a trap, but his ego won't let him stay away. He'll want to control the narrative, convince everyone that he's the victim. She made the call while I listened, told Greg that Mom was worried about him, that everyone was worried, that they wanted to support him. Greg's voice came through the phone faintly, suspicious but intrigued. He agreed to come. "He'll be there," Cecilia said after hanging up. "Mom, what are you planning?" "Justice," I said simply. "I'm planning justice." Saturday arrived grey and drizzly, the kind of day that matched the weight of what I was about to do. I woke early, cleaned my already clean apartment, set out chairs in my small living room, made coffee and set out cookies I'd baked the night before, an absurd domestic touch for what was essentially an ambush. Cecilia watched me move around, her expression uncertain. "Mum, are you sure about this?" "Very sure." "He's going to be angry. He might get violent." "I know. That's why I've prepared." I showed her the panic button I'd bought, the direct line to police that would bring them immediately. "And I've invited enough people that he'll be outnumbered. He's not brave when he doesn't have the advantage." Family and friends started arriving at 1:00. Cecilia's brother Thomas and his wife, her sister Jennifer, Diana from next door, offering silent support, a few family friends who'd known Cecilia since childhood, even Barbara from church, who'd heard enough of my story to want to witness whatever was about to happen. They filled my living room, perching on chairs and the couch, some standing against the walls. The apartment felt crowded, warm with body heat despite the cool day outside. Everyone was nervous, making small talk that felt forced. Greg arrived last at 1:30, deliberately late to make an entrance. I watched through my window as his BMW pulled up, as he sat in the car for a long moment before emerging. He looked terrible, his suit expensive but wrinkled, his face gaunt, dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. But he walked to my door with his shoulders back, his chin up, still trying to project confidence he no longer felt. I opened the door before he could knock. "Greg, thank you for coming." He looked past me at the room full of people, and I saw suspicion flash across his face. "What is this?" "A family gathering. We wanted to talk to you, try to understand what's been happening." He stepped inside warily, like entering enemy territory. Everyone watched him, and I could see how uncomfortable he was with their attention, their scrutiny. Greg was used to being admired, feared, respected, not examined. "Have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair I'd placed in the center of the room. The hot seat. He remained standing. "I'll stand." "Suit yourself." I moved to stand near the window where I could see everyone's faces. "Greg, we're all worried about you. Cecilia told us you've been struggling, that you think someone's been stalking you, threatening you." "Someone has been," he said immediately, defensively. "Someone's been in my house, leaving things, moving things, trying to drive me crazy." "And you have no idea who?" "No, that's the worst part. Whoever it is, they're smart, careful. They don't leave evidence." "Maybe," I said quietly, "it's because you've hurt so many people that you can't narrow it down. Can't figure out which of your victims finally decided to strike back." The room went silent. Everyone stared at me. Greg's face flushed red. "What are you implying?" "I'm saying that you're a cruel man, Greg. That you've spent years treating people like they're beneath you, like they exist only to serve your needs. And eventually, that kind of behavior has consequences." "This is insane. I came here for help and you're attacking me?" No, I'm telling you the truth. Finally. I looked around the room at the gathered faces. Greg threw whiskey in my face a month ago, called me a servant, humiliated me in front of my daughter. That was the final straw, but it wasn't the first incident. He's been contemptuous and cruel for years. Thomas spoke up, his voice angry. Is that true? Greg waved a dismissive hand. She's exaggerating. It was a minor disagreement. He threw alcohol in her face, Cecilia said, standing up from where she'd been sitting on the couch. I saw it. I sat there and watched him do it, and I didn't stop him. I should have, but I was too scared of him, too trained to accept his behavior. Greg turned to her, betrayed. Cecilia, no, Mum's right. You're cruel. You've been cruel to her, to me, to everyone. You control and manipulate and hurt people, and you think your money makes it okay. One by one, others started speaking up. Jennifer talked about how Greg had insulted her husband at a family dinner, called him a failure for being a teacher instead of a businessman. Thomas mentioned a loan Greg had refused to give him during a difficult time, despite having plenty of money, just to teach him a lesson about self-reliance. Barbara from church told a story about Greg berating a waitress for bringing the wrong wine, making her cry in front of the entire restaurant. The stories accumulated, painting a picture of systematic cruelty, of a man who used his power to demean and control everyone around him. Greg tried to defend himself, to explain each incident away as misunderstanding or exaggeration. But his voice got weaker with each story, his denials less convincing. You're all turning on me, he said finally, looking around the room wildly. This is exactly what whoever's stalking me wants. They're trying to isolate me, make me seem like the villain. You are the villain, I said gently. You've always been the villain in your own story. You just convinced yourself you were the hero. Greg's face went through several emotions in quick succession: rage, desperation, denial. He pointed at me with a shaking hand. This is you, all of it. You're the one who's been doing this. The mannequin, the notes, everything. You admitted it. Did I? I kept my voice calm. I said actions have consequences. That's not an admission. You're completely out of line. Careful, Thomas warned, standing up. Don't talk to our mother that way. She's not even your real... Greg stopped himself, but too late. The words hung in the air, exposing his contempt for family bonds, for anything that didn't serve his interests. She raised us, Jennifer said coldly. That makes her more real than you'll ever be. I watched Greg realize that he'd lost them all, that his paranoia and accusations had pushed away anyone who might have supported him. He stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded but isolated. Let me tell you what I think happened, I said, moving closer to him. I think you've spent so long treating people like garbage that you started to feel guilty about it, deep down, where you couldn't admit it even to yourself. And that guilt manifested as paranoia, as the fear that someone was coming for you. Because part of you knew you deserved it. That's not... I think you moved your own things and forgot about it. Left notes to yourself, created a stalker, because it was easier than facing the fact that you're the monster in your own life. The mannequin could have been a prank, could have been Cecilia trying to scare you into seeking help. Could have been anything, but you convinced yourself it was some vast conspiracy because that fed your ego, made you important enough to be targeted. Greg lunged at me then, faster than I expected. His hands reached for my throat, rage finally overcoming self-control. But Thomas caught him, pulled him back, and several others moved to restrain him. Don't touch her, Thomas said, his voice unnervingly calm. Greg struggled for a moment, then collapsed, not physically, but emotionally. He sank to his knees on my living room floor, his expensive suit rumpled, his carefully constructed image destroyed. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. I can't live like this. Then change, I said. Get help, real help. Stop being cruel. Stop treating people like they're beneath you. Become someone worth being. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something genuine in his eyes, not defiance or rage, but fear and confusion and something that might have been the beginning of self-awareness. But first, I continued, pulling out my phone, you need to face consequences for what you've already done. What are you doing? I'm calling the police. You just attempted assault in front of 12 witnesses. You've been harassing your wife, making threats, behaving erratically. You need professional help, and you need to be held accountable. Please, don't do this. I'll get help. I'll change. Just don't. It's too late for please. I dialed 911, kept my eyes on him as it rang. You should have thought about consequences before you threw whiskey in my face. The police arrived within 10 minutes. I'd been specific on the phone. Attempted assault, history of threatening behavior, multiple witnesses. They took statements from everyone in the room, took photographs of Greg on his knees in my living room, his suit wrinkled, his face streaked with tears he couldn't hold back anymore. Cecilia stepped forward as they prepared to take him away. I'm filing for divorce, she said to him clearly, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. Greg didn't respond, just let them lead him out to the patrol car, his head down, defeated. After they left, the room erupted in conversation. Everyone needed to process what had just happened, to talk through their shock and satisfaction and lingering questions. Diana hugged me, whispered that I was magnificent. Thomas apologized for not seeing Greg's behavior earlier, for not protecting me better, but I barely heard any of it. I stood at my window, watching the patrol car drive away with Greg in the back, and felt empty. Not satisfied, not victorious, just tired. The aftermath moved quickly. Cecilia filed for divorce on Monday, citing emotional abuse and erratic behavior. She had documentation, text messages, witness statements, the police report from Saturday's incident. Greg's lawyer tried to fight it, but Cecilia's lawyer was better prepared and more motivated. Greg was released from police custody after 24 hours, but was required to stay away from Cecilia and me. The judge granted Cecilia a restraining order without hesitation. His business partners forced him to take an indefinite leave of absence. Word had gotten around about his breakdown, his paranoia, his assault on his mother-in-law. Nobody wanted to do business with a man who was clearly unstable. I heard through the grapevine that he'd checked himself into a psychiatric facility, finally accepting that he needed help. Whether it would work, whether he'd actually change, I didn't know. That was no longer my problem. Cecilia stayed with me for 2 weeks before finding her own apartment, a modest place, nothing like the mansion she'd left behind. She seemed happier there, lighter. Started talking about going back to school, finishing the degree she'd abandoned when she married Greg. I forgot who I was, she told me one evening over dinner. Spent so long being Greg's wife that I lost Cecilia. But I'm finding her again. I'm glad. Mom, can I ask you something? She set down her fork, looked at me seriously. Did you really do it? The stalking, the mannequin, all of it? I took a sip of water, considering my answer. What matters is that Greg believed someone was after him. Whether it was real or in his head, the result was the same. He faced his own fear and guilt. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm giving you. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I think I understand. And Mom? Thank you for showing me that I didn't have to accept being treated that way, for being strong when I couldn't be. A week later, I ran into Barbara from church at the grocery store. She pulled me aside in the produce section, her voice low. Everyone's talking about what happened, she said, about Greg's breakdown and your confrontation. You're either a hero or crazy, depending on who you ask. What do you think? I think Greg got what he deserved, and I think you're braver than anyone gives you credit for. That was the general consensus I discovered. Some people thought I'd pushed Greg over the edge, that I'd been cruel in return. But most people thought he'd had it coming, that someone needed to stand up to him eventually. Diana remained my constant supporter, my co-conspirator. She never asked for details about what I'd done or how I'd done it, just accepted that justice had been served and helped me return to normalcy. "Do you regret it?" she asked me one evening over wine. "No, I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it." "Good, because you changed Cecilia's life, freed her from a man who would have destroyed her slowly." That was true. Cecilia was blooming again, finding her confidence and independence. She'd started therapy, started processing years of emotional abuse she hadn't recognized as abuse, started building a life based on her own choices rather than Greg's demands. 2 months after the confrontation, Greg's business partners bought him out. The official story was that he was retiring early for health reasons. The reality was that nobody trusted him anymore. Nobody wanted to work with a man who'd proven so unstable. He sold the mansion at a loss, desperate to liquidate assets for the divorce settlement. Moved into a small condo across town, far from his former neighborhood, far from the life he'd built. I saw him once, 3 months after everything happened. I was at the pharmacy picking up a prescription when he walked in. He looked different, thinner, older, humbler. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced with jeans and a simple jacket. He saw me and froze. I nodded at him, just once acknowledging his presence. He nodded back, then turned and left without getting whatever he'd come for. That was enough. I didn't need him to apologize or explain. I just needed him to remember, to know that actions have consequences, that cruelty doesn't go unpunished forever.